For those not in the know, I am a huge fan of the Harry Potter series, and have been since childhood. Ever since my mom got me the VHS of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, I fell in love with the entire series. I have all the books, movies, and even a few of the video games. Recently at work I've been thinking about it, playing the game again, so that's exactly what I'm gonna do. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is an action-adventure top-down puzzle video game released for the Gameboy Advanced and published by EA Games. It is based on J.K. Rowling's novel of the same name and the film adaptation. Along with it being released for the GBA, it was released for the Game Boy Color, Microsoft Windows, and PlayStation in November 2001, and was remade 2 years later for the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox in December 2003. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's get into this. So, the game begins with the most classic childhood title screen ever. Just looking at this just brings me back to the greatest memories before I lost the game on the bus. So, the game gives you a quick rundown on Harry's backstory. Orphan boy, parents killed, and then is told that he's a wizard and has to go to a wizarding school. You know, normal preteen shit. The game finally begins and you're introduced to Ron, who tells you that you have class on the 3rd floor, even though school literally just started, like you were just sorted. Not even 5 seconds later, you meet this entitled little shit named Draco Malfoy, who looks like his face had an arrangement with the pavement. Speaking of the graphics, I think they're pretty good. I especially enjoy the look of the sprites. I just feel like they spent most of the time working on the backgrounds, which I absolutely love all the attention to detail in the scenery and backgrounds though. Just look at the Gryffindor common room. That's a fully rendered 16-bit couch, and it's amazing how the Mirror of Erised was done as well. The amount of effort they put into it just blows my mind. Now thinking about it, Harry walks pretty damn slow. He even does magic slowly. You have to wait for him to do this weird little animation before a spell is casted. We get up to the 2nd floor and are introduced to Peeves, the weird prankster ghost. In the books and movies, the castle is littered with ghosts, but in the game, it looks like he's the only one here. In the book, he's an obstacle. His job is essentially to make everyone's life just difficult. But in the game, he doesn't really do anything. He makes a few cameos and does jack shit. To save the game, you walk into these floating books that you find hanging out around every level. They implement this saving feature in the rest of the GBA games moving forward. Once you get to the first class, you meet the professor and the obvious villain of the game, Quirrell, who's the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher and shows you the very first spell, Flipendo. You learn 5 spells throughout the game: Flipendo, Alohomora, Avaforce, Wingardium Leviosa, and Lumos. And let me tell you, learning them is the bane of my existence. It's mainly because I'm very bad at memorization. It's these little Simon Says mini-games where you just copy whatever the teacher is doing. I really wish there was a different way to learn them though. You win house points if you do well in any of the classes. But let me get you in on a little secret here. The house points don't mean jack shit. Mainly because your house wins the house cup at the very end of the game, no matter what happens. Anyway, once you pass the minigame, you enter the challenge for the certain spell that you just learned, where you're introduced to the first enemies of the game, Yellow Gnomes. The rest of the enemies after these guys are just a joy. You got Blue Gnomes, which takes 2 hits to kill, Gross Snails, Fire Turtles, the Troll, who goes from the first boss to an enemy that you meet in the forest, Doxies, who are a pain in my ass, and Venomous Tentaculars, who eat the Doxies. The bosses are essentially non-existent, as I said earlier. The Troll is the first boss fight, and that's like an hour into the game. Also, I gotta tell you about this health bar. It's represented by these lightning bolts in the corner, and if you were to take a hit, you gain health back by eating Birdie Bot's every flavor beans. You find hidden in mop buckets, bookshelves, and even bushes. After this first level, the rest are pretty straightforward. All you really have to do is solve puzzles and collect items to keep the story going. You kinda get into a zone just going from level to level. Except some of this platforming is fucking abysmal. Look at this shit. The platform gets right to where I'm standing. I try to step on it, and what the hell, man? Just let me on. Don't even get me started on these broomstick / Quidditch levels. The first is when Draco steals Neville's Rememberall, and you have to chase him around on a broomstick, which is the worst thing ever. The controls go from being manageable to just awful as soon as you start doing one of these, and you're praying for it to be over as soon as possible. Moving the broomstick is just so awkward, especially because you're playing with a D-pad. To make it worse, there's 5 broomstick levels. 5 fucking levels! As if one wasn't enough! The very end of the game is when things get really cool. You have to put a 3-headed dog to sleep using a flute that Hagrid gave you earlier in the game. You gotta set fire to Devil's Snare, which is a magical plant that has the ability to constrict anything in its surrounding environment, whose weakness is fire. So I have no idea exactly who left circular round stands of fire standing right next to it. That seems pretty irresponsible, doesn't it? Also, you gotta do the last broom level, collect a few potions, and finally fight Professor Quirrell and Lord Voldemort, who is pretty easy. All you have to do is stand behind the Mirror of Erised, which deflects Voldemort's magic back at him, eventually defeating him. So altogether, the game only has 3 boss fights, if you count putting a 3-headed dog to sleep using a magic flute, a boss fight. And that's a shame because this game definitely had potential to have more bosses. The game ends with Gryffindor winning the House Cup, and this creepy freeze frame of Harry looking directly at the camera, looking as if saying, "Yeah, I'm the boy who lived. Nobody else matters." Overall, the game is really fun and it just takes me back to the good old days. I highly recommend it even if you're not a fan of Harry Potter. What? Wait, give me a second. Hello?